Welcome to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two elected officials chat about the municipalities and regional districts that make up local government in BC and how we manage to get anything done at all. I'm Brenda.
And I'm Alton. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about another one of the challenges that local governments can face. We know that increased communication efforts lead to higher confidence and greater democratic participation from residents. It can also lead to people perceiving a higher level of transparency when it comes to their local government. But as the world moves forward from the COVID times, what challenges do we face? And how do we talk to our residents in a meaningful way?
Talking with us today is Aidan Buckley, the Manager of Communications and Engagement for the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Aidan joined the SCRD in November 2020 and is responsible for communicating the organization's work to 30,000 people, a local newspaper, and a local radio station, as well as other media outlets and social media platforms to share information about what's happening in local government on the Sunshine Coast.
Aidan, it's great to finally get an opportunity to sit down with you. What was the path that brought you to the SCRD and the role that you have now?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been a keen listener to your podcast so far. I listened to the podcast you did with our illustrious CAO, Dean. Thanks for having me. You know, you can probably tell from the accent that, I'm not originally from this side of the world. I'm originally from Dublin in Ireland, and background primarily was media. So I did a journalism degree in university, and then worked on Ireland's #1 daytime television programme, which was filled with fashion and beauty and all those fun things. And then moved over to Canada 2010, did a lot of work in the digital space, so a couple of digital agencies, and then I worked with Electronic Arts as well for a year, which was super cool. And I was knocking on the door at Global for about a year before they finally had me. Great news director there, Ian Haysom, who finally took me on, and I helped them launch their 24-hour news channel, BC1, way back in 2014. There for a couple of years, and then decided, as some folks who work in media have done in the past, to get into communications. And the SCRD is my third communications role. The first one was with the Independent Investigations Office of BC, which is an organisation that investigates the police in instances where police may have been involved in serious harm or death. So that was with the provincial government. I finished up that job and went to Burnaby RCMP. I was with the RCMP for just over 3 years. In Burnaby, kind of managing communications and big events that took place, Kinder Morgan Pipeline protest being one, which was
Right.
a summer. And then over to the regional district. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey so far, and I think most communications people kind of tend to embark on similar voyages before they get through to comms, So.
Was there something about this particular position that drew you, or was it the Sunshine Coast itself in that you wanted to maybe move from the city, or what brought you to the coast?
I think we've always loved the coast. The opportunity to live here, #1. But when I saw the job, I remember saying in the interview that I just saw so much opportunity because it was a new role that had been created,
Right.
and there's a real opportunity to put a wee bit of a stamp on it. Looking at the challenges as well that the coast continues to have. And for me, any job I've had, over the past, let's say, 10 years, in TV, it was breaking news that really kind of excited me, and I love that aspect of the job. In communications roles I've had before, being in policing, again, that was the really super interesting aspect of the job for me that I love to jump into. And similarly here, the types of issues that we have coming up, they're interesting issues, and it gives a lot of job satisfaction having an opportunity to kind of see them all the way through, right? So yeah.
What does a day in your work look like? What does your work entail?
Different day to day, which is why I love the job. So, we've everything from, looking ahead to board committee meetings that are coming up, larger projects that are going on, so, for example, the past month, we've had everything from budget, the Cooper's Green Hall replacement project, coming through, looking ahead to then, topics like utility billing, drought response through the summer, looking at work plans then through our planning department and when they may be moving ahead with engagement around OCPs. It's a lot of it is planning for sure, but then day to day something can happen that completely turns your day on its head, and that's I get quite a lot of the job satisfaction from that, to be honest, because I like a job that's consistently interesting, and this is one that does that.
Well, there's no shortage of that here, eh?
No.
Well, and that's interesting because to go from breaking news to IIO to Burnaby RCMP, I bet when you looked at the Sunshine Coast and local government, were you thinking it was going to be as action-packed as Burnaby RCMP and breaking news?
You're bang on.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, because I say to folks who I still communicate and still speak to from those roles, I say I came over and maybe I wasn't expecting it to be quite as action-packed, but, you know, when I think back, I think we've had, you know, I want to say maybe 4 emergency operation centres, 2 states of local emergency since I started the job, and in both of which part of my role with the SCRD is acting as an information officer
Right.
through those emergencies, right? So you're right in the thick of it. And yeah, I certainly did not expect that. I think I was a month into the job when we had our first one, which was, you know, we had a washout up near the treatment plant. We had a landslide, right? And I remember, you know, working, you know, through Christmas on that, you know, and my wife kind of turned on us talking and saying we thought it was going to be a bit quieter here than other jobs, you know. But you know, I think within the organisation themselves, the level of support that you get through those EOCs is top notch. You know, you're getting to work with great folks. So
I guess that leads to an interesting question in that obviously local governments in BC have a lot of common challenges, but what are some unique challenges or opportunities that you think the SCRD has had that other local governments in BC might not have had to think about?
I think you know, my first challenge when I got the job was figuring out what a regional district does, because you can read all you want, but until you actually sit down with subject matter experts, you don't get a real idea of, you know, how budgets are managed, right?
For sure.
And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, is explaining our governance process, explaining the fact that, you know, we have rural areas and we have municipalities, but, you know, the SCRD manages recreation in municipalities and water in some of the municipalities and solid waste in the electoral areas. Like when you lay all this down on paper, and I think, you know, Prince George did it really well quite recently, and it's something that we're going to work on as well, is it just, you know, outlined the different levels of government and their roles, right? Just in a simple graphic. But when I actually started putting all that down on paper, I realized it's going to be quite difficult for us to explain this in a very simple graphic. So I think municipalities, it's a little bit easier to explain and for the public to understand precisely, you know, who they are and what they do. With regional districts, you know, down to everything from geographical spread, which comes with a very changing demographic and very different challenges based off on the electoral area that you're living in. Mm-hmm. On the coast, you know, you go back, you look at, you know, drought response, for example. You know, we look at Area A and Pender, you know, who are on a different water system, to Chapman, who have a very different experience through the summer than the majority of residents on the coast. So I think that's both a challenge and an opportunity, right? In that, on one hand, you're trying to explain the workings of a regional district, but you have to bring everything back to kind of brass tacks to try to explain, you know, the regional district model, why things are done differently in regional districts as opposed to municipalities, and then hope that the residents stick with you for the ride through to actually explaining service levels and stuff like that, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard enough, even as a new elected official in a municipality, having to understand what the regional district's role is. So I can't imagine how you try and communicate that to residents. It's got to be a challenge.
Probably have 30,000 different perspectives on the questions and how the regional district applies to them.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how they would finish the question our regional district looks after. And get them to list it.
That's a good question.
It would be interesting to see what they answered. So the SCRD, I'm interested in this, has a mantra, and I don't know, did this come from you? Let them see us coming?
So it's something which was originally introduced to me, you know, through a couple of great mentors that I've had prior to coming over here. And I guess it focuses on, you know, transparent governance and proactive communication. Right, so I know they're long type words, but essentially it's, you know, just being straight up with the public and letting them know what's coming down the line, and then communicating it with them in as easy a manner as possible. And that's kind of the focus that we're trying to bring to the SCRDs. For example, when we have, with budget news releases, what we've tried to do is, at each round of budget, letting people know here's the current property tax implications, and try to give instruction as to how you can break that down for your home, right? So that when the budget is adopted and property tax bills land, there's not the shock there that, residents have had an opportunity to be as educated as possible through materials that we've released to hopefully plan for that coming, and that doesn't just go for budget items. We look ahead to drought response, for example. It's let our residents know that stage one's gonna come in May, and then throughout the year, giving them a sense of when stages may or may not be coming, the types of challenges that we're having with our water system, everything from use to capacity. So that's the type of mantra that we've tried to adopt. It's very much a work in progress, because I think there's still some items that I think 100% we can do a little bit better of communicating out. Ultimately, it comes down to capacity and shifting priorities through the year. But I'm really hopeful that we can get there. So residents are relatively well informed about a topic by the time it actually lands on their doorstep.
Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated, or maybe not. No, I'm fascinated by the topic of engagement, and really how to get some that's meaningful and not complaint based.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that? Do you find there are some methods that are more successful than others?
I think first it's being honest about the type of engagement that you're doing, because I think that if you come out to residents and say you want to engage them and they have their say and then maybe they aren't heard, it's very difficult to have continued confidence, right, in that type of communication, right? So what we've tried to do is, over the past, say, 12 to 18 months is, if we're coming out with a topic, or if we want to hear from residents, we're trying to be very clear in, what our ask is of residents, and ultimately, when and where the decision will be made about the topic that we're engaging them on, right? I totally hear you on, complaint-based engagement as well. I think, it's super important that those folks are heard, and that you actually take maybe a deeper dive within yourself to figure out whether or not there is something we could be doing better, and not just fob that kind of stuff off. And that's something that we've really made an effort to do. But regards harnessing engagement and trying to get folks involved, it's honestly, it's a consistent challenge for us, because through COVID, we introduced hybrid engagement. We introduced, online engagement, which really hadn't been done a whole lot, prior to, at least in my experience. And now we've kind of hit this weird world where we know that, the online components, they're very easy to set up. It's a lot easier to share. At times, it's very easy to get feedback through those setups, but understanding that there's folks who also want that level of in-person. So that's what we're trying to navigate right now is both of those worlds, and, where's the happy medium between the two of them. And we haven't got there yet in any way, shape or form. Something which I've been doing on the coast, which I've had, decent feedback so far, has been going direct to community organizations. So, we have a mailing list of community organizations and other folks. And if anybody's listening and says they don't get the email from me, well, then, please email me, let me know. And, we'll make sure you get them. And, right down to, water updates to, to the budget, anything we do at utility billing. We'll fan out to those community organizations, because what we have on the Sunshine Coast is, I think we've got a really motivated communities who've got really great community groups who harness great engagement with their communities. So my hope is to be able to engage effectively with them and chat to them with the hope that they can then bring their groups along with them, if that makes sense. And I think that's maybe the best way to go.
It leads to an interesting point, because you're experimenting with online engagement, reaching out to community associations. We know that the financial officers and the CAOs have sort of a province-wide collective, if you will. Is there something similar with the communications managers?
Yeah, so both locally and regionally. So just this morning I was on a call with other regional district communications people. So
Okay.
we do it monthly. So this morning there was 11 other comms folks from regional districts on there.
interesting.
And it's interesting because we had that conversation on how do we explain our role. And one of them had taken a run at doing that graphic, which I mentioned earlier, similar to what Prince George had done, speaking about what their role is versus the municipality versus the federal government. And they showed us a very busy looking graphic and asked us our opinion on it. So, you know, for example, today we talked about, you know, annual reports. We talked about, you know, website redesigns. We talked about, you know, how we best explain our role. And that's been hugely valuable because we're all facing the same challenges. And I think a lot of times, from an organizational perspective, we think that we're facing these challenges in isolation, but it's not until you speak with your peers that you realize, no, we're not. Like, everyone's facing the exact same challenges. So we learn from each other. We absolutely steal from each other. You know, if somebody's already done something that's worked,
Why
well, then
reinvent the wheel?
why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
Take it in with their thumbs up. Take it in, sit, run through. Maybe steal isn't the best word. We borrow with permission, right, from them. And then, you know, locally, you know, we're super fortunate. We've got, you know, really great communications people, you know, at the other local governments. And you know, we speak very regularly. And there's a real keenness to help spread each other's message to make sure we're getting to as many people as possible.
Good to hear. Let's pretend you were the only communications official on the coast and the two municipalities hired brand new green communication people. What would your top 3 best pieces of advice be?
That's a very good question. I think for any new communications person coming in, the advice that was given to me when I started communications was get to know your teams really, really well. Because for me within the regional district, there's some organizations and some government organizations where, you know, your media person or your communications person is the de facto maybe face of the organization, right? They go out, they do the interviews and stuff. The approach that I tend to bring is more so wanting the subject matter experts to speak to a topic because they're the ones who I'm writing the points with anyway. So all I am is a face that's basically saying what they're going to tell you. And if you ask more questions of me, I'm just going to go back to them and ask them those questions, right? So I think understanding your team and getting a good sense of, you know, where those people are who you know you can go to get information, you know, very, very quickly. And for us, you know, I truly think on the coast, you know, we're very fortunate to have, you know, really great local media. To be straight up, you know, Coast Report was a great newspaper and thriving, hopefully, you know, at least on the face of it, you know, when you're reading through the paper. And you know, if they send us over questions, you know, I like to get back to them in a timely manner. So knowing who the best people are to go to. So I think that's the first thing I think is getting to know your teams. The other thing is just learn the geography, I guess, the political geography of the coast. You know, it's, you know, we've got, you know, different levels, different local governments here on the coast, understanding who does what, which, as you said earlier, Brenda, it can be a bit of a challenge, right? Understanding where the challenges are, understanding that we've also got the province who are involved in areas such as roads, right?
Right.
So that if those challenges are coming up, that you know where to send people, you know, and that's maybe brings me on to the third thing is, I think this doesn't just go for communications. I think it's really important that when residents are asking questions of us, be it through you know, BC Ferries, be it roads, you know, anything else that we don't really look after on the coast. I still think it's important that we're steering them towards the right people to ask the questions, you know, and it's getting to know who those people are as well. Because I think it's quite easy to take a step back and say, we don't do roads, you know, or we don't
do windows.
Right?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? But I think, you know, ensuring that resident's voice is still heard and, you know, figuring a way that you can ensure that they know the right person to go to, but then actually taking the information they've given you and speaking to folks within your own organisation and, you know, asking the question, you know, is there anything else that can be done and whether or not this is, you know, through to, you know, the board from an advocacy perspective or something else along those lines. I know that was quite a long answer, but yeah, I think that they'd be at least maybe the start of the things that I'd advise them on, you know.
That's good.
Do you have, let me just jump in real quick to follow up on that a little bit. Do you have a role to play in that board advocacy work, either specifically or more generally?
I think depending on how much the board wants me involved, right? I think There's a couple of things. So advocacy, writing letters, getting in touch with government, is great, and getting through to the right ministries. I also think there's times when you need to be more vocal about what's going on. And to give you an example, I think 2 years ago during the drought, we were waiting for, I think, the initial preliminary water license for Church Road, if I remember correctly. And we spoke about it publicly, because I think that when you have an issue like that, that's maybe holding something up, there's only so many letters you can write before you have to speak about it publicly. And I'm always an advocate for doing that. I'm always an advocate for us trying to get ahead of an issue and speak about it, so that, the communities that we ultimately serve don't have this sense that we're sitting on our hands and not doing anything, right? Being vocal about the challenges that we have and what we're doing to address them, right? Some a lot easier to talk about than others, right? For sure. But I always like to think I'm the voice in the room who's pushing us to speak about these things. And that's kind of the way I've always been through comms, right? Is, other organizations I've worked for, where we've had to take hits because we were unable to speak about certain topics, particularly when you talk about, policing in general, right? And you just have to take them, and you can see how that can affect your workforce. You can see that, you got folks who are doing this really good work, and you just back then, and you just wish that you could talk about it, but you couldn't. You couldn't talk about it until an investigation concluded or something along those lines, right? Thankfully, I haven't seen so much of that here, but I would hate for it to get to a point where, due to us maybe not speaking as much about an issue, it may cause, the public to think we're not doing something, and then, that may be causing staff to have this sense that that's what the public are thinking, right?
I'm sure there are members of the public that are always thinking we're not doing anything, right?
Well, I said that. We had a meeting actually in this very room about a month ago with some community organizations around the shelter fire. And there was assumption that the District of Sechelt was doing nothing. And I said to them, why is the assumption always that, it seems to me, the assumption is always that local government is doing nothing about whatever the issue is? Why isn't the assumption that, wow, they must be doing everything they can?
They must be too busy to talk about it.
I wonder what the holdup is. Like there's a negative bias, it seems to me, since becoming involved in local government, that the assumption is that we're not doing anything about whatever, be it the shelter, be it water, be it anything.
Yeah.
Why is that, Aidan Buckley?
In 30 minutes or less.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I will actually take that one, because if I hear a complaint from the public, I always think back to maybe what we could have done differently to communicate about that chosen topic, right? There's times where we will communicate in every media form that we can find, and we'll still have people who contact us and say, hey, I didn't see this, I didn't hear this, right? Fair enough. But I always take maybe a wee bit of a look inside and think to myself, like, what could we have done, anything different? And I think for sure, I think you're always going to have folks who are always going to want more. I think there's absolutely folks who just have this general maybe distrust or view of government as just maybe not moving as forward as quickly as they'd like. I don't think that we're ever going to do anything to dispel that. I think more so for me, it's, if they're coming forward with those concerns, it's getting enough information out there so that general member of the public can look and see and think, actually they are trying to move this forward, right?
Such an articulate answer. You needed him the other night, eh?
I think that's the first time anybody's ever used the word articulate.
Well, let's articulate a bit more about Church Road, since this is, a specifically local topic. Then, so now here we are with, from what I understand, and Mr. SCRD Director can correct me if I'm wrong, but the work's essentially been done, and now we're waiting for final tick, go forth and produce water. Am I right? So from a communications perspective, because it feels like this has been a forever process, I almost feel like we do need to be knocking on the doors in Victoria or something. Like, we were in a state of local emergency. How can this not move its way up the priority list in whatever office it is in Victoria? So would this be a time where as a communications person, you might be thinking we should be getting loud on this? Or is there a more strategic pathway?
We issued a release, the next steps are outlined in it.
Okay.
In that it's essentially, monitoring creek flow. And then my understanding is there's a meeting set up with the province. So, there's definitely momentum in that project. I think if that momentum ceased, or if we weren't hearing back, that's maybe where, through the board, and if the board, felt that there was a need for us to advocate further, I think that's where I'd jump in and get involved,
That was actually a great project, not from it having taken so long specifically to get built, but during the construction phase and in the lead up to construction, the communications team was putting out regular, I don't know if it was weekly or bi-weekly, regular intervals with photos and information going to residents in the area, to anybody who wanted the information. And I think when we look at the ways in which we communicate, no, it wasn't always good news, but I think like photos and regular interval information speaks huge to the residents who have concerns.
Yeah, we had a mailing list of residents in the area. We have a speak earlier about how we engage with folks or how we talk to folks. We have a platform that we use, an engagement platform, letstalk.scrd.ca. And we have a Church Road page on there where folks can go in and ask questions. To jump back quickly to the earlier question you had as well, I think one thing with a lot of our projects, I've never worked in a local government in this manner before. So a lot of the times I feel the value that I bring to a table is pure naivety, right? When it comes to how some of these projects are put together. And I feel that maybe I approach some of these projects with questions that the public may have as well. So, an example being the Church Road Wellfield project. When I look at that, I thought, well, it's a water license, right? It's not just, just that water license. It's, you have Vancouver Coastal Health, you have DFO, you have, through the SRD, through Town of Gibson's, building permits. There's so much involved with that project that it's not just, it's not a matter of just, going to Victoria and advocating with that minister and having the license, signed and there you go. And the challenge that I have then is taking what is a very complex process and communicating that to the public in a manner in which they understand and that they don't fall asleep by the second paragraph, right?
Yeah.
And that's a challenge that we're still wrestling with, because as I find out, as I discover this information, in my mind, I'm figuring how do we tell people about this? Like, how do we talk to them about it? And I think right up to the release that we issued, we made people a wee bit more aware about what's involved in that final license. We hadn't, maybe at the very start of the project, when I think back, could we have put more information out there around the licensing requirements? Yeah, maybe we could have. And, the beauty for me is I go back and I look at these projects and I always do a little debrief on them and figure, what could we have done differently? What could we have done better? What went well? What would we change? Ultimately to better inform future projects, so, fingers crossed, the Langdale Wellfield coming online next couple of years. When we look at the development of that project and communication with residents, there's a lot that we've learned through communication with Church Road, which will help us formulate hopefully far better. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, far better comms through that.
Well, and I mean, you'll be starting, I think, with a greater, the public themselves are going to be better educated on the whole process, because there will be a certain degree of the members of the public that actually paid attention and took that in and had some learnings from that as well. Let's turn to elected officials.
Be careful here now.
And oh my God, let's just talk about social media, because that's where everybody already knows everything. Okay, so Alton and I pretend it's 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, and we're brand new, and you're a seasoned communications officer. And we say, Aidan, help me out, man. Should I stay off social media? Should I engage? Should I not engage? Should I enroll in therapy now? What?
What have I gotten myself into?
What have I gotten myself into?
Right.
Why does nobody like me? What would your advice be?
If I can maybe speak about what we've done within the regional district, right? Because that'll help inform maybe the discussion a wee bit. Last year, we made a decision to turn off comments on certain posts on Facebook, the SCRD. That was for a couple of reasons. One being that, the helpfulness of what we were seeing was not really helping to push any sort of conversation forward. I feel, two big levels of responsibility in my role. One being that if we put something out on social media and we offer it as a forum for the community to have a conversation, we need to moderate that conversation, right? And the other responsibility, which is paramount in my mind, is our staff. We have incredibly talented staff who work really, really hard. And I can see it being quite demoralizing to go on and, if we've posted about a project or something like that and immediately seeing somebody challenge that or,
Right.
be super negative about it. In some cases, it totally, crossed the line. I think we're okay with criticism. Criticism, we can deal with that and we can work through it. But some of the things that we were seeing, I felt there was a real need for us to take a step to shut it down. I can tell you that since we, restricted comments on a number of posts that we've put up, I've certainly had more time to focus in on more important work within the regional district. I think that, amongst the community, we're not seeing those kind of discussions at least take place on our page. So that's the tack that we've taken within the regional district. And again, I just felt there's a true responsibility there to do that. Now, when we did it, my phone didn't light up. I've not had people emailing me, right, giving out. So I think that a newly elected official, I think it's very personality based, to be honest. I think I'd say to tread lightly. You need to go with your eyes open. I'd say speak to other elected officials who've been in the job for 5 or so years, right? See what their experience has been like on social media and understand that you can be doing the best job possible, and somebody without a picture and without their real name can completely turn your day on its head with a comment, depending on how you let that affect you. Because I think a lot of folks say it's water off a duck's back, and to be straight up with you, I really disagree when people say that you have to have a hard shell to be a politician. I don't think that should be the case, to be honest, because I think ultimately we're going to see less people willing to put their name forward to be an elected official, and then where will that get us, right? So I'd say tread lightly. Think about the value that Facebook is going to bring, whether or not it is going to bring value. What are you going to use it for? Are you going to is your better option a mailing list as opposed to putting stuff up?
Right.
On Facebook, understanding that a mailing list, at least you have a good sense of who you're sending stuff out to and who you're communicating with. Again, on Facebook, anybody can jump in and say whatever they want to you and say whatever they want about you, and that's...
I rarely post. I rarely engage, but I definitely get wrapped up in reading
The content.
of stuff that, people are whipped up about something. And, a lot of what you see is not factual. And it's all I can do not to try and correct something. And this was really bad for me personally around COVID as somebody who was running the vaccine program as opposed to being in municipal government. Just because there was so much misinformation out there, but it was so hard not to get wrapped up into something and comment. And I mean, Alton definitely comments more than I do. And I mean, you're a master at stating stuff, and I've seen you put a lot of stuff up correcting misinformation about the water situation or SCRD stuff. And that's the lesson. It's never enough. You can write the most brilliant post and it's 100% accurate, and someone's still going to have something to rip on about it.
Yeah.
Right?
I heard something recently that I really liked. It was, don't bring charts to an emotional gunfight.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's
Nobody's
something
going to
that-
care about
no-
your chart.
Exactly. Nobody cares about the charts when they get worked up about, water or safety or
Yeah.
whatever it is, the cost of fuel.
But it's a tough issue. I went to UBCM this is one of their sessions last September. And I went to it, and it was a panel of, in this case, it was actually a panel of female elected officials, and that was the topic, and social media was part of it. And I think she was a mayor on the island, and she had turned off commenting on her posts for the very reason that you spoke of. But she really struggled with it because part of the oath that is taken is around how you interact with community, being able to listen to them, considering what their opinions are. And she felt like when she turned off comments, she was basically turning off the ability to see what their opinion was on something. So she really struggled with it, but for the sake of her mental health, she turned it off. And like you say, had to find, or at least accept that there were other ways for people to get their opinion across to her.
We do have like our engagement platform as an alternative way to express your opinion. You know, we have projects listed on there. We've got, you know, one section that's completely focused on water. And then we actually have like just an open forum there where anybody can ask a question, anyone can make a comment. And, you know, I absolutely dip in and out of the community groups as well. And if one person comes forward with a comment that's sarky or is trying to put down your organization, fair enough, you do you, right? But, you know, where I do see some value in social media is that if I'm seeing something pretty consistent, people are asking maybe a similar question, or if we put out some form of communication, I'm seeing the same question asked about it. Well, then again, I take that look inside and think, could we have messaged this in a different manner that might have helped people understand it that wee bit better, you know? So I absolutely still see value. It's just, again, it's a willingness to engage and understanding that you're not just responding to the first comment. As soon as you're in, you're in.
Right.
You know, and that thread is going to keep on going, right? So I think tread cautiously would be my advice, and speak to people who've been there before, you know.
That was something else that I actually picked up in the last term. Former Councillor McLean basically would say, you engage once and you get one reply, and that's it. If you can't get the point across or have that conversation with those two comments and the replies, you're not going to have that conversation with the person.
Yeah. I'll throw, like, the one caveat that I give you with social media is, if we're in an emergency situation, it's an incredible tool for us to have. So for us, you know, as I said earlier, there's certain topics that will, you know, turn off comments on, but, you know, anything that's emergency related through the state local emergency or emergency operations centre related, we leave them open. I recall back when we had a state local emergency and we had some evacuations, I believe it was along the Ocean Beach Esplanade area in Elphinstone. And, you know, we had somebody comment who we were able to, you know, get in direct contact with through Facebook and through email, where we were able to kind of put their mind at ease a little bit about what was going on. I think from an information out perspective, it's hugely valuable.
Yeah.
It's just the type of comments and stuff. So I think you have to kind of find that happy medium between the good and the bad, you know.
Does the SRD use Twitter and Instagram as well, or
Instagram.
Just Twitter and Facebook?
Twitter and Facebook. We use Twitter sparingly, I'd say, and more so to put out some of the large updates, and then the emergency situations we'll use it. When I was here at the start, we did just a kind of a general budget survey, and as part of that, I'd ask people about where they were getting their information. And the most part, the community was getting it from, as the Coast Reporter and Facebook. So with that in mind, that's where we've kind of invested most of our time. I think that if you're going to expand past those tools, if you're going to look at Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, like all these other social media tools, you need to make sure you can resource them.
Yeah.
Because, once you launch those kind of tools, and, I have looked at the likes of Instagram and stuff, and I maybe think it's maybe not as best suited to us. I think if you're a tourism organization, I think it's incredible. You're hitting the right market there. So for me, it's taking a look at the demographics that utilize the sites themselves, understanding that, Twitter, for us, it's a great channel for us for news organizations, and other local governments, whereas Facebook is far better for our community,
Now I want to go look up what local governments are using TikTok.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I'd say I can imagine there's a couple for sure, but like you're always going to have these new social media platforms emerging, right? And it's it's kind of it's what you do and whether or not your content that you're providing is applicable. Like we issued, I said earlier before we kicked off recording like that, we issued a 4-page news release all about water projects. I've never issued a 4-page news release before. I don't know how I do that on TikTok,
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Like, it's, whereas, something like Facebook where you can just, give a brief summary of what you're talking about and a link through where folks can read a wee bit more. And again, that's where, I go back to us being very fortunate to have, local media here still on the coast, because a lot of people go to the paper for their information, both in print and both online. So I think, maintaining and harnessing those relationships and supporting them is really important,
I suppose one of the last things that I want to know, and you touched on it a little bit there in the last couple of minutes talking about Facebook, but Are there times when it's better to not engage at all than to engage on the wrong platform or for the wrong reasons? Like, obviously, trying to engage on TikTok is not going to be a worthwhile endeavor, but are
Not
there
unless
better
you know how to
times?
dance.
But are there times when it's better to just not engage at all, even if it is spreading misinformation or what have you?
Yeah, I think so. I often look at social media and, I do a fair bit of reading around kind of, social media trends and the types of information other local governments are sharing and kind of how it's being received. And my focus with our communications is to release something and to have it in language that can be, understood, and that the majority of folks who read that understand it. And if there's misinformation out there, they can see through the misinformation through to the communication that we're providing, right? I absolutely have seen misinformation both, here and other organizations that I've worked for. And sometimes you can absolutely push back, and it makes sense to push back. And we've done that. We've done that through the paper. We've done it through, letters to the editor. We've done it through, news releases ourselves. Ultimately for me, it's, if there's a sense that, misinformation out there is, derailing the public message that you're trying to get out, then I think it's time to push back. And as you mentioned earlier, Brenda, talking about, the pandemic and, having to get on top of your public messaging, I think that's where you have a provincial health officer and a health minister out pretty much every day and sometimes twice a day speaking consistently, right? So that's the challenge with these big topics is, you have to be resourced in a manner that allows you to be consistent. And I think if you're consistent with your message, then I'd like to think that the majority of the public who are seeing it and reading it can understand it and realize that, that there is misinformation out there and maybe to trust what you're saying.
It's an open topic for sure. And I know we've talked about transparency in a previous episode, and we know that we're going to be doing more on it. It's more a continuum than it is a specific.
Yeah. I think from a government perspective, if you've lived in a place where maybe the government wasn't as transparent, be it in Canada or being in another country, I think you bring those beliefs to wherever you may move to next. And, they could be doing everything. They could be opening up at all and telling you everything that's going on. But I think in the back of your mind, you're not looking at the people, you're thinking about just government and that word being government. And, they weren't, didn't trust them before. I'm not going to trust them here, right? Because they did this to me way back when, and I think, I come from a country where, myself, my wife left because, there was a huge economic downturn and, I feel that the government empowered didn't service all that well. And I'd like to think that if I was to ever move back, and as I'm saying this, I'm questioning whether or not I'm actually being truthful here. I think I am. And I'd like to think that I'd realise that the government that was in power in 2008, 2009, back in Ireland is not the same government that's there today, although some individuals are, but I'd like to think that, they have, maybe the better interests of folks in my generation in mind. So if I went back, I'd like to think that I'd have that level of trust. But I think that if you have been let down by any organisation, or if you've been let down, or if you feel you've been let down by a government in the past, it may be a little bit more difficult to trust them, right? So that's just me.
So every 4 years, when there's an election, as a communications guy, do you just put your head down and under the covers for the campaign season and
Yeah, we do.
Just watch it all go on?
Yeah, we do. We have we don't do a whole load of communication along the election cycle, and that's something that other local governments do as well. And for me, to be straight up with you, what I kind of look at is obviously the folks who are moving forward to be on the board or be in a municipality, and get a sense of the types of questions they're asking and the types of interest that they have.
Oh, interesting.
So that, if they are elected, thinking of that see us coming approach that we spoke about earlier, that I have a good sense of, what they may be advocating for, if there's certain projects that they're super interested in, so that I can better gear our communications towards that, understanding that if they've been, and I listen to them as well, if they've been super vocal about something and they've explained something in a manner that, that makes sense that the public are understanding, But then you pull some of that language and use it as well, in future
Right.
communication materials, right? So
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I did
Okay.
through the election, was just kind of seeing who was running and getting a good sense of where they may be moving.
Well, thank you so much for taking time with us today to share some insights and wisdom into communications with local government. I think that this is a good place to end today's episode.
You've been listening to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two local government officials chat about our regional districts and municipalities that make up government here in BC. If you aren't following our podcast yet, you can subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts. Maybe you have a topic suggestion for the show, or you want to come and chat with us about what's going on in your area of the province. Drop us a line at locallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com, and let's make it happen.
This episode of Locally Speaking is recorded on the traditional territory of the Sechelle Nation.